The Empire celebrated victory. The galaxy thought humanity had lost. Then Earth revealed the truth. The battle above the human colony of New Meridian ended just after dawn. When the smoke and radiation finally cleared, the crews of the Scan Dominion looked out at a field of broken ships. Human hulls floated in pieces. Escape pods drifted with no power left in them. The largest human battleship, the Ares Crown, hung dead in space, its reactor core dark and cold. Grand Admiral Thakrar Vex stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Iron Verdict, and watched the wreckage on the main screen. He was tall for a Scan, with gray scales and eyes the color of dull copper. He had fought humans for 11 years. He had lost friends to human tricks, human weapons, and human stubbornness. Today, he believed, all of that was over. "Confirm it," he said to his tactical officer. "Confirm the human Third Fleet is destroyed." The officer, a younger Scan named Brez, checked his readings twice before answering. "Confirmed, Grand Admiral. No active human warships remain in this system. Their command ship, the Ares Crown, shows 0 power output. We count 18 destroyed capital ships and 43 destroyed escorts. Human life signs in the wreckage are minimal." A murmur went through the bridge crew. Some of the officers actually smiled, which was rare for Scan during a war that had cost them so much. Vex allowed himself a long breath. "Send word to the Dominion Council. Tell them the war is over. Tell them Earth has lost its last real fleet." The message went out across 1,000 light-years in less than an hour, carried by the Dominion's relay network. Within a day, it reached every major Scan world, every allied species, and every listening post in Dominion space. The war that had drained the treasury of 100 star systems, the war that had cost 3 generations of Scan soldiers, was finally won. Celebrations began almost immediately. On Scarome, the Dominion's capital world, the streets filled with citizens waving banners. Fireworks that had been saved for a peace they were not sure would ever come lit up the sky in gold and violet. Children who had grown up hearing stories about the stubborn creatures from a small blue world now heard that those creatures had finally been beaten. The Dominion Council called an emergency session, not to discuss a crisis, but to discuss peace. Councillor Drav something or other, the oldest member of the council, stood before the assembled leaders and made a short speech. "For 11 years, she said, the humans refused to bow. They fought us system by system, world by world, ship by ship. They cost us more than any other species we have ever brought into the Dominion. But today, that resistance has ended. Today, the last human fleet lies broken above New Meridian. Today, we can finally say, the Scan Dominion has won." The council chamber erupted into applause. Some of the older councillors, the ones who remembered the early years of the war, when human raiders had struck deep into Dominion territory and humiliated 3 separate admirals, allowed themselves to weep with relief. Far from Scarome in the human sector of space, the news spread differently. It spread quietly, through channels that most of the galaxy did not know existed. On a small moon called Haven, hidden behind the gas giant Kepler-9, a woman named Elena Voss received the report in a cold, dim command room. She was not old, but the war had put gray in her hair early. She wore no rank insignia, because officially, the fleet she commanded did not exist. "They think we're done," she said, reading the intercepted Dominion transmission on her screen. Beside her stood General Marcus Chen, a broad-shouldered man with a scar along his jaw from a battle 6 years earlier. He read the same transmission over her shoulder. "They think the Third Fleet was our real fleet," he said slowly. "They think the Ares Crown was our real flagship." Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile. "That's because we wanted them to think that." To understand what was happening in that dim command room on Haven, one has to go back 3 years, to the moment when human military leaders realized they could not win the war the way they had been fighting it. By that point, humanity had already lost 4 core worlds to the Scan Dominion. Earth itself remained free, protected by defenses that had taken decades to build, but the outer human colonies had fallen one by one. Every human ship built to face the Dominion in open battle eventually lost. The Dominion had more resources, more shipyards, and more soldiers than humanity could ever match in a straight fight. It was General Chen, then a colonel, who first proposed the idea that would change everything. He brought it to a secret meeting of Earth's remaining military leadership, held deep beneath the mountains of what used to be Colorado. "We can't outbuild them," he told the room. "We can't outgun them, but we might be able to outthink them." His plan was simple to describe and terrifyingly hard to carry out. Humanity would stop trying to protect every colony. Instead, humanity would build two fleets. One fleet, the one the Dominion would see, would be built to look strong, to look like everything humanity had. It would fight real battles, take real losses, and slowly be worn down over years, exactly the way the Dominion expected a losing side to behave. The second fleet would not exist. Not on any register, not in any transmission, not in any battle report. It would be built in secret, piece by piece, hidden in systems the Dominion did not know about, using resources that were never officially spent. It would be crewed by people who had, as far as any record showed, died in earlier battles or simply vanished. "We let them win," Chen said. "We let them believe they're grinding us down, and when they think the war is over, we show them what we actually built." It took convincing. Many in that room thought the plan was madness, or worse, that it was giving up on the colonies that would be sacrificed to make the illusion believable. Admiral Rios, the highest-ranking officer in the room that day, argued against it for almost 2 hours. But in the end, they saw no better option. The math of the war was clear. Humanity could not win by strength alone. It would have to win by patience, and by making the enemy believe a lie for as long as possible. Alina Voss, then a young but well-respected fleet captain, was chosen to lead the secret project. She picked her people carefully. Engineers who could disappear from official records without questions. Soldiers who had lost everything already and had nothing left to lose. Scientists who believed, as she did, that humanity's real strength was never going to be matched ship for ship, but might be matched in cleverness. They called the project Second Dawn. For 3 years, while the visible human fleet, called simply the Home Fleet by the public, and led openly by Admiral Rios, fought and slowly lost ground to the Dominion, Second Dawn grew in the shadows. Hidden shipyards were built inside hollowed-out asteroids in the outer solar system, and in systems far beyond, places the Dominion star charts did not even list as inhabited. New weapons were developed using technology recovered from captured Dominion ships, and combined with ideas humanity had been too poor and too rushed to build before the war. The hardest part was not the building, it was the waiting and the losing. Real human soldiers died in real battles to keep the illusion alive. Real colonies fell. Real families lost real people. Alina Voss carried the weight of every one of those losses because she knew the truth that most of humanity did not. Some of those battles were fought not to win, but to look convincing while losing. The final piece of the plan required the destruction, or the appearance of destruction, of what the Dominion believed was humanity's last real fleet, the Third Fleet, led by the Ares Crown. The truth was that the Ares Crown had already been stripped of its most important crew, and its most valuable secrets weeks before the battle at New Meridian. The ship that Grand Admiral Vex saw floating dead in space was crewed by volunteers who understood exactly what they were doing, and by automated systems designed to make the ship look fully staffed and fully powered right up, until the moment its reactor was deliberately shut down. It was, in the end, a controlled sacrifice, painful but planned. "We lost good people today," Alina said quietly, still looking at the screen showing the Dominion's celebration messages spreading across 1,000 worlds. People who knew what they were signing up for, people who chose it anyway. Marcus Chen nodded. He had known several of the crew on the Ares Crown personally. They knew what it would buy us. "And what does it buy us?" asked a voice from the doorway. Both of them turned. Admiral Rios stood there, older now, his uniform worn from years of real war. He had been let in on the full truth of Second Dawn only a year earlier, brought in quietly once his trust in Alina and Marcus had been tested enough times. "It buys us time," Alina said, "and it buys us surprise. Right now, across the entire Dominion, they think humanity is finished. They're standing down alert levels. They're moving fleets back to garrison duty. They're planning victory parades instead of planning for an enemy that might still be out there." Rios walked further into the room and looked at the map displayed on the far wall. It showed human space, a small corner of the galaxy compared to the vast reach of the Scan Dominion. But scattered through hidden systems within that corner were markers Rios had only recently been shown. Shipyards, fleets, weapons platforms, all of it built in silence, all of it waiting. "How many ships do we actually have?" Rios asked. Alina brought up the true numbers, numbers that existed on no official government record, numbers known only to a small circle of people in that room, and a few others scattered across hidden bases. 211 capital ships, she said, built using technology the Dominion has never seen, faster engines, better shields, weapons designed specifically to break through scan armor patterns, because we've spent 3 years studying every piece of wreckage we could recover from every battle we lost. Rio stared at the number for a long moment. The Dominion's active battle fleet, the one currently celebrating above New Meridian and across 100 other systems, numbered in the thousands. 211 ships sounded small against that. "It's not enough to fight them everywhere," Marcus admitted, reading the same doubt on the Admiral's face. "But it's not supposed to fight them everywhere. It's supposed to fight them exactly where it matters, exactly when they don't expect it." "And where is that?" Rios asked. Alina zoomed the map in on a single system, a bright yellow star surrounded by orbital markers that most star charts, Dominion and human alike, listed only as an uninhabited system with no strategic value. "Scarome," she said. "Their capital, their shipyards, their command network, everything runs through there. And right now, while they celebrate a war they think they already won, their capital defenses are lower than they have been in a decade." Rios let out a slow breath. He had spent 11 years fighting a war he believed humanity was losing, one hard battle at a time. Standing in that room, looking at that map, he began to understand for the first time that the war humanity had actually been fighting was a very different one, fought mostly in silence, mostly in shadow, and mostly by people whose names would never appear in any history book unless this plan worked. "When do we move?" he asked. Alina looked at the timeline displayed beside the map. Every piece had been building toward this moment for 3 years. The Dominion's celebrations, according to their own intercepted communications, were expected to continue for at least 2 more weeks, with the largest ceremonies planned at Scarome itself, where the entire Dominion Council and most of their senior military leadership would gather in one place to mark the end of the war. "We move when they're all in one place," Alina said. "We move when they've already told themselves the story is over, and then we're going to show them exactly how wrong they were." Outside, across 1,000 worlds, the Scan Dominion continued its celebration. Bells rang in cities that had never known human presence. Soldiers who had fought and bled for over a decade finally allowed themselves to rest. Grand Admiral Vex stood on the deck of his flagship and watched the wreckage of the Ares Crown drift silently in the dark, believing with his whole heart that he had just witnessed the final chapter of humanity's story. He had no way of knowing that he had only witnessed the end of the first act. Back on Haven, in the cold command room hidden behind a gas giant that appeared on no Dominion map, Alina Voss began giving the orders that would set Second Dawn into motion. Ships that had waited in silence for 3 years began to power their engines for the first time in a real operation. Crews who had trained for a battle they were never sure would come checked their weapons one final time. The galaxy believed humanity had lost. Humanity was about to prove otherwise. The celebrations across the Scan Dominion did not slow down after the first week. If anything, they grew larger. Every planet wanted its own parade. Every city wanted its own monument planned. Statues of Grand Admiral Vex began appearing in public squares before he had even returned home from the front. On Scarum, preparations began for the largest ceremony the Dominion had ever held. The Council announced that in 2 weeks, every senior military officer, every governor of every Dominion world, and every allied species leader would gather at the capital for what they were calling the Victory Accord, a grand ceremony to formally close the war and celebrate the peace that would follow. Grand Admiral Vex was ordered home to attend. He did not want to go. Something about the ease of the final battle at New Meridian had been bothering him since the moment his ships opened fire. He had fought humans for 11 years. He knew how they fought. They did not simply stand and die the way the Third Fleet had. They ran, they tricked. They found ways to make even a loss cost the Dominion dearly. But at New Meridian, the human fleet had fought a hard battle and then simply stopped. No last desperate ambush. No hidden minefield. No trap sprung at the final moment. It had felt too clean. He raised this concern with Counselor Drav during a private communication 3 days after the battle. "You are worried because you won too easily," Drav said, not unkindly. "That is understandable, Grand Admiral. You have fought this enemy for 11 years. It is hard to believe it is finally over." "I have fought them for 11 years," Vex replied. "That is exactly why I am worried. They have never once made this kind of mistake before. Their commanders are cautious. They do not waste ships. They do not stand and fight battles they know they will lose without some other purpose behind it." Drav considered this for a moment before answering. Perhaps after 11 years they finally ran out of other purposes. Perhaps they finally ran out of ships and options and hope. Even the most stubborn creature eventually breaks, Grand Admiral. You saw the wreckage yourself. Their command ship was destroyed. Their fleet was destroyed. What more evidence do you need? Vex had no good answer to that. He agreed to attend the Victory Accord, though the uneasy feeling in his chest did not go away. While the Dominion prepared its grandest celebration, its military posture across known space began to relax in ways that would have been unthinkable a month earlier. Fleets that had been stationed along the border of human territory for years received orders to return to their home systems for resupply, and in many cases, decommissioning. The war had been expensive, and the Dominion Council was eager to reduce military spending now that peace, as far as they understood it, had arrived. Garrison forces at Scarum itself, always kept strong throughout the war in case of some unlikely human strike deep into Dominion territory, were reduced as well. The Council reasoned that, with the human fleet destroyed, there was no longer any threat capable of reaching the capital. Half of the capital's defense fleet was reassigned to ceremonial duty, meant to fly in formation during the Victory Accord parade rather than stand guard. It was exactly the opening second dawn had been waiting 3 years for. On Haven, Elena Voss watched the Dominion's military movements through a network of listening posts and quiet human agents who had spent years working undercover in Dominion-controlled space, some of them for so long that they had built entire lives there under false identities. Their capital defense fleet just dropped by 40%, Marcus Chen reported, reading updates as they came in. They're pulling ships back from 3 separate border systems for the ceremony. Scarum hasn't been this lightly defended in over a decade. They really believe it, Elena said, almost surprised despite 3 years of planning for exactly this outcome. They really believe the war is over. Why wouldn't they? Marcus said. We spent 3 years making sure they would. Elena nodded slowly, but she did not feel the relief she had expected to feel. Instead, she felt the full weight of what was about to happen settle onto her shoulders. Second Dawn's fleet, 211 ships built in secret, crewed by people who had given up their old lives to make this possible, would soon leave hiding for the first time. There would be no turning back once that happened. If the plan failed, humanity would have thrown away its only real advantage and its last hidden fleet in a single stroke. She called a meeting of Second Dawn senior commanders that night. The room was small, holding only 12 people, but those 12 people represented the entire secret leadership of humanity's hidden war effort. Captain Priya Nair, who had spent 2 years undercover inside Dominion shipping networks gathering intelligence. Colonel James Ockafer, who had overseen the construction of the hidden shipyards in the outer systems. Dr. Sarah Lynn, whose team had reverse-engineered enough Dominion technology to give Second Dawn's ships an edge that the enemy would not expect. And Admiral Rios, now fully briefed and standing beside Alina as the plan's newest and most senior supporter. In 11 days, Alina told them, the Dominion Council, most of their senior military command, and representatives from every major allied species will be gathered in one place for the victory accord. Their capital's defenses will be at their lowest point in over a decade. This is the moment we built Second Dawn for. She brought up the full battle plan on the main screen. It was not a simple frontal assault. 3 years of studying Dominion tactics, technology, and communication patterns had gone into designing something far more precise. We are not going to fight the entire Dominion military, she explained. We cannot win that fight, and we were never trying to build a fleet that could. What we can do is strike the head of the snake while it is distracted, and force them to accept a peace on terms that do not leave humanity as a conquered people. The plan had 3 parts. First, a small strike team, led by Captain Nair, would infiltrate Scarom's orbital communication network days before the main fleet arrived. Their goal was not destruction, but disruption. When the moment came, they needed to be able to cut the Dominion's ability to call for reinforcements from other systems, at least long enough for Second Dawn to establish a position of strength. Second, the main Second Dawn fleet, hidden until the last possible moment using cloaking technology adapted from captured Dominion stealth systems, would arrive at Scarom during the height of the Victory Accord ceremony, when the Dominion Council and its senior leadership would be gathered in the most vulnerable position they had occupied in the entire war. Third, and most important, Second Dawn would not simply attack and destroy. The goal was never to wipe out the Scan Dominion, or to become the very kind of conqueror humanity had spent 11 years resisting. The goal was to demonstrate, undeniably and immediately, that humanity's strength had never been broken, and to force the Dominion to the negotiating table from a position where they could no longer pretend they had won. We're not trying to win a war of destruction, Alina said. We're trying to win a war of truth. They believe a story right now. Our job is to replace that story with a different one where humanity was never as weak as they thought, and where continuing this war would cost them everything. Colonel Ockafer raised a concern that had been on everyone's mind. And if they don't believe us, if they see 200 ships and decide to fight anyway, out of pride or fear or both? Alina had thought about this question more than any other over the past 3 years. Then we make sure that even in a losing fight, they understand exactly what it would cost them to keep fighting a species that can build a fleet like this in secret, while losing every visible battle for a decade. Either way, the illusion ends today. The only question is how it ends. The room was quiet for a long moment. Everyone in it understood what they were about to risk. 3 years of secrecy, sacrifice, and hidden work were about to be spent in a single operation that could either end the war on humanity's terms or destroy the only real advantage humanity had left. 11 days, Alina said again. Get your people ready. Over the following days, Second Dawn's fleet began final preparations. Ships that had sat hidden in asteroid shipyards for years powered up their engines for full system tests. Crews ran combat drills against simulated Dominion formations built from years of collected battle data. Dr. Lin's engineering teams made final adjustments to the fleet's stealth systems, technology that combined captured Dominion cloaking methods with human innovations that even the Dominion's best scientists had never encountered. Captain Nair's infiltration team departed first, traveling in small, unmarked ships disguised as Dominion cargo vessels, using identities and travel documents built over years of careful undercover work. Their journey to Scarome would take 6 days, arriving with just enough time to prepare their part of the operation before the main fleet's arrival. Across the Dominion, the celebrations continued, unaware of what was quietly moving through the dark toward the heart of their empire. Grand Admiral Vex arrived at Scarome 5 days before the Victory Accord ceremony, greeted by cheering crowds who lined the streets of the capital to welcome home the hero who had, as far as they knew, finally ended the long war with humanity. He accepted the celebration with the practiced grace of a career military officer, smiling for the crowds, giving speeches about sacrifice and victory, while the uneasy feeling in his chest never fully faded. He requested a meeting with the Council's head of Capital Defense, a scan officer named Fen Dorash, to review the reduced garrison numbers personally. "I understand the war is considered finished," Vex told him, "but I would feel more comfortable if we kept the capital's defense fleet at full strength until after the Victory Accord ceremony is complete. There is no harm in caution." Dorash, a younger officer eager to please the newly celebrated Grand Admiral, agreed to review the matter, but the Council's budget decisions had already been made, and revering them would require approval that was unlikely to come before the ceremony itself. In the end, only a modest number of additional ships were added to Scarome's defenses, far short of what Vex had hoped for, and nowhere near enough to prepare the capital for what was actually approaching. 6 days after leaving Haven, Captain Nair's infiltration team arrived at Scarome without incident, their false identities holding up under the light scrutiny given to what appeared to be ordinary cargo traffic arriving for the ceremony. They moved quietly into position near key points in the capital's communication network, waiting for the signal that would begin the next phase of the operation. On Haven, Elena Voss stood before her assembled fleet commanders one final time before the main force departed. "They think the story is over," she told them. "They think humanity lost. In 5 days we're going to show them exactly how wrong they are. Not with anger, not with revenge, with the truth. Get some rest. Check your ships one more time. And remember what we're actually fighting for. Not destruction, not conquest. Just the right to be left alone and the right to be respected as equals in this galaxy." The fleet stood ready. Far above, in the vast darkness between the stars, 211 human ships that officially did not exist began the journey toward the heart of an empire that believed the war was already won. The Second Dawn fleet traveled through empty space, using a method of movement that the Dominion had never seen before. Instead of the bright, easily tracked jumps used by most starships, human engineers had developed a quieter system, one that moved ships in smaller, harder-to-detect bursts, hiding the fleet's true signature among the natural background noise of deep space. It was slower than a normal jump, but far safer for a fleet that needed to remain hidden until the exact right moment. For 5 days, the fleet moved in near total silence. Crews spoke in low voices, even though there was no real reason to whisper in the vacuum of space. The tension of what they were about to attempt sat heavy on everyone aboard. Elena Voss spent much of the journey reviewing the plan again and again, looking for weaknesses, running simulations with Dr. Lin's team to test how the fleet's stealth systems would hold up against a fully alert Dominion capital defense network. Every simulation came back with the same uncomfortable truth. The plan depended on the Dominion remaining exactly as distracted and relaxed as their own intelligence suggested they would be. If Scarome's defenses were raised even slightly higher than expected, the entire operation could unravel. "They still have no idea we're coming," Marcus Chen reported on the fourth day, reading updated intelligence relayed quietly from Captain Nair's team already in position at the capital. "The Council has actually reduced ceremonial security even further to make room for larger public crowds. Grand Admiral Vex tried to get the defense fleet reinforced, but the Council denied his request. They're calling it unnecessary caution." Alina allowed herself a small, grim smile. "Vex is smart. He knows something isn't right, but smart isn't the same as being listened to." On the fifth day, the fleet reached the outer edge of the Scarome system, still cloaked, still silent, positioned just far enough away to remain undetected by the capital's sensor network. The Victory Accord ceremony was scheduled to begin in less than 20 hours. Captain Nair sent a final confirmation from the surface. Her team had successfully placed disruption devices at 3 key points in Scarome's orbital communication relay stations, small devices designed not to destroy anything, but to quietly corrupt outgoing signals at the moment they were activated, delaying any distress call long enough for Second Dawn to establish control of the system before Dominion reinforcements from other worlds could arrive. "We're ready on our end," Nair reported. "Just say the word." Alina looked around the command deck of her flagship, the Resolute, a ship built in secret over 3 years, using technology no Dominion scientist had ever studied. Every person on that deck had given up years of their life, and in many cases their old identities entirely, to make this moment possible. "All ships," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Final approach in 8 hours. Hold position and hold silence until my signal." The Victory Accord ceremony began exactly as planned, with grand fanfare across Scarome's capital city. Council members arrived in ceremonial transports, greeted by crowds that had gathered for days in anticipation. Allied species representatives from a dozen worlds stood together on a massive stage built specifically for the occasion, ready to witness what the Dominion was calling the greatest victory in its history. Grand Admiral Vex stood near the front of the stage, his uniform decorated with new honors, though his expression remained more guarded than the celebratory mood around him. He scanned the crowd out of old habit, the way he had scanned every battlefield for 11 years, looking for anything out of place. He found nothing. The sky above Scarome was clear. The defense fleet, though reduced, patrolled in their expected formations. Nothing on any sensor readout suggested anything unusual. Councillor Drav began her speech to the gathered crowd and the watching worlds beyond, broadcast across every Dominion channel and every Allied network. 11 years ago," she said, her voice carrying across the packed square, "we faced an enemy that refused to yield. A small, stubborn species from a small, stubborn world who fought us at every turn, who cost us more than any other people we have ever encountered. Today, we stand here not just to celebrate a victory, but to celebrate the end of a long and painful chapter in our history. Today, the war with Earth is over." The crowd roared with approval. Fireworks began lighting the sky above the Capitol, planned to continue throughout the ceremony. High above, hidden in the dark beyond Scarome's outer sensor range, Alina Voss watched the broadcast feed on her command screen, along with every officer on the Resolute's bridge. "Not yet," she said quietly, though no one had moved. The ceremony continued for another hour. Speeches were given by Allied species leaders, each one praising the Dominion's strength and the wisdom of finally ending a costly war. Grand Admiral Vex was called to the stage to receive the highest honor the Dominion could offer, the Star of Unity, awarded for his role in what the Council was calling the final victory over humanity. As he stood on stage, accepting the honor with a stiff, formal bow, his eyes drifted once more to the sky. Something about the quality of the light seemed slightly wrong, though he could not say exactly why. A trained instinct built over 11 years of war told him something was about to happen. He was right. All ships, Elena said, her voice calm and clear over Second Dawn's fleet-wide communication channel. Signal is go. Nair, activate the relay disruption now. Deep within Scarom's orbital communication stations, Captain Nair's small devices activated exactly as designed. Outgoing distress signals across the capital's network would now be delayed by several critical minutes, corrupted just enough to prevent an immediate call for reinforcements from other systems. Second Dawn Fleet, Elena said, decloak and advance to Scarom orbit. 211 ships that had existed only in shadow for 3 years began to appear across Scarom's sensor network all at once, their advanced stealth technology dropping away in a coordinated wave that no Dominion operator had ever prepared for. On the bridge of Scarom's primary defense station, alarms began sounding in a pattern that had not been heard in over a decade. The senior officer on duty, a young scan named Tessacor, stared at her screen in disbelief as ship after ship appeared out of nowhere, arranged in a formation that made their intentions unmistakably clear. "Sir," she said, voice shaking slightly as she turned to her commanding officer, we have an unknown fleet appearing in orbit, 200-plus ships. They're human hull designs, human weapon signatures." Her commander stared at the screen, unable to process what he was seeing at first. "That's impossible. The human fleet was destroyed at New Meridian." "Sir, I'm reading 211 capital ships, all fully armed, all in attack formation, directly above the capital." Down on the surface, the ceremony's celebratory mood shattered in an instant as emergency alerts began flashing across every public screen in the city. The fireworks that had been lighting the sky moments earlier were replaced by the sight of hundreds of unfamiliar ships descending into visible orbit, close enough now to be seen with the naked eye from the ground. The crowd's cheering turned to screaming and confused shouting within seconds. Council members on the stage stood frozen, staring upward at a sight none of them had ever imagined seeing above their own capital. Grand Admiral Vex looked up at the sky, and for the first time in 11 years of war, he felt something close to genuine shock. There, arranged in a formation that any experienced commander would recognize as a show of controlled, deliberate strength rather than a desperate final attack, was a human fleet larger and more advanced than anything he had ever faced in battle. "That's not possible," he said quietly, echoing the same disbelief spreading across the entire capital. "We destroyed their fleet. We destroyed the Ares crown. We saw the wreckage ourselves." But the evidence hanging silently in the sky above him told a very different story than the one the Dominion had been celebrating for weeks. Counselor Drav, still standing on the stage, looked to her security officers for answers, but none of them had any. The Dominion's capital, at the very moment of its greatest celebration, found itself staring up at the very enemy it had just finished telling the entire galaxy was defeated. On the bridge of the Resolute, Elena Voss watched the chaos unfolding on Scarom's surface through a dozen different sensor feeds and intercepted communication channels. She felt no satisfaction in the fear and confusion she saw. This was not a moment for celebration. It was simply a moment that had to happen, a moment 3 years and countless sacrifices in the making. "Open a channel to the Dominion Council," she said. "All frequencies, let them hear this clearly." A moment later, her voice began broadcasting across every screen and channel on Scarom, interrupting the panicked emergency alerts and confused military chatter that had filled the airwaves since the fleet's arrival. "People of the Scan Dominion," Elena said, her voice steady and calm despite the enormity of the moment. "My name is Fleet Admiral Elena Voss, commander of the Second Dawn Fleet of Earth. You were told that humanity's last fleet was destroyed above New Meridian. That was true. It was also, by design, only part of the truth. Across the capital, and across every world receiving the broadcast, billions of Scan and allied species citizens stood frozen, listening to words that shattered the story they had believed for weeks. For 3 years, Alina continued, while your forces fought and defeated the fleet you could see, we built the fleet you could not. 211 ships, hidden from every sensor and every scout you ever sent into our territory. We are not here today to destroy your capital. We are not here to become the kind of conquerors you feared humanity might be. We are here because we have earned the right to be heard, and we intend to be heard. On the stage below, Grand Admiral Vex listened to every word, his expression shifting from shock to something that looked almost like grim understanding. 11 years of fighting an enemy that never truly gave up, even when every visible sign suggested they should have, suddenly made a different kind of sense. He knew, Vex said quietly to no one in particular, staring up at the fleet in the sky. He knew something was wrong. But knowing had not been enough. The Dominion, blinded by its own celebration and its own certainty of victory, had walked directly into the one moment of true vulnerability that 11 years of war had never before allowed. The galaxy had believed humanity had lost. Now, standing in the shattered silence of their own capital, the Scan Dominion was about to learn exactly how wrong that belief had been. For a long moment after Alina Voss's broadcast ended, no one on Scarum moved. The council members on the stage stood in stunned silence. The crowds in the streets stared upward at the human fleet hanging above their capital, unsure whether to run, hide, or simply keep staring in disbelief. Even the Dominion's military officers, trained for over a decade to respond quickly to any threat, seemed frozen by the sheer impossibility of what they were witnessing. It was Grand Admiral Vex who moved first. He stepped to the front of the stage, away from the panicked council members, and looked up at the fleet with the calm focus of a man who had spent his entire career learning to think clearly in moments of crisis. He turned to the nearest communication officer. "Get me a direct channel to their flagship," he said, "now." Within moments, the channel opened, and Alina Voss's voice, along with a video feed showing her standing calmly on the bridge of the Resolute, appeared on the emergency screens across the capital. "Grand Admiral Vex," Alina said, recognizing him immediately from years of intelligence reports. "I wondered if you would be the one to respond first." "You have 200 ships," Vex said, his voice controlled despite the tension clearly visible in his posture. "We have thousands across the Dominion. Even accounting for the element of surprise, you cannot hope to win a war against our full military." "You're right," Alina said simply. "We can't, and we're not trying to." This answer seemed to catch Vex off guard. "Then what exactly is the purpose of this display?" "The purpose," Alina said, "is to end a war that never needed to be fought this way in the first place. We are not here to conquer Scarum. We are not here to destroy your council or your people. We are here because for 11 years, your Dominion treated humanity as a problem to be erased, not as a people to be understood. We built this fleet not to attack you, but to make sure you could never again believe you had the power to erase us without consequence." Down in the crowd, Councillor Drav had regained enough composure to push her way back toward the stage, flanked by several nervous security officers. She looked up at the fleet, then at the screen showing Alina Voss's calm expression, and felt something she had not expected to feel after 11 years of war, uncertainty about who had actually been right all along. "This is a trick," Drav said loudly enough for the nearby microphones to catch. "A bluff. They cannot possibly maintain a fleet this size in secret for years without our intelligence networks detecting some sign of it." "Councillor Drav," Alina said, her voice remaining even, "I understand your disbelief. For 3 years, our engineers worked in hidden systems your star charts don't even list as inhabited. Our crews gave up their names, their old lives, and their place in any official record to make this fleet possible. I do not expect you to simply take my word for what we have done. I expect you to look at the 211 ships currently in orbit above your capital and understand that they are proof enough." As if to punctuate her point, several of Second Dawn's ships shifted position with a smooth, coordinated precision that any experienced military officer would recognize as a demonstration of genuine strength rather than desperate bluster. It was not an act of aggression. It was simply a reminder of capability. Grand Admiral Vex studied the movement carefully. 11 years of war had taught him to read a fleet's competence from how it moved, how it held formation, how quickly it could respond to changing conditions. What he saw now unsettled him more than any single weapon could have. "Your ships," he said slowly, "they move differently than anything we've studied from human forces before." "They should," Alina replied. "We built them using lessons learned from watching your forces defeat every version of our military you were allowed to see. We built them to counter exactly the tactics that won you every battle for the past 3 years." Vex absorbed this in silence. The pieces of a much larger picture were falling into place in his mind, each one more uncomfortable than the last. The strange ease of the battle at New Meridian, his own unspoken doubts, dismissed by a council too eager to celebrate. The years of steady human losses that had felt, in hindsight, almost too consistent, too controlled. "You let us win," he said finally. "For years, you let us believe we were winning a war we were actually losing the entire time." "We let you believe what you needed to believe," Alina said, "in order to buy time for something that could actually end this war on terms that did not leave humanity destroyed or enslaved. I will not apologize for that. Real people died to maintain that illusion on both sides. We did not do this lightly." Across the Dominion, as the confrontation played out live across every major broadcast channel, reactions varied wildly from world to world. On some Scan colonies, panic set in immediately, with citizens fearing that the human trick meant an all-out invasion was imminent. On others, particularly among allied species who had always felt uneasy about the Dominion's aggressive expansion, the revelation sparked something closer to quiet respect for a species that had endured 11 years of losing battles while secretly building the means to demand a real peace. Within the Dominion Council itself, opinions split sharply. Some councilors, humiliated by the sudden collapse of their celebrated victory, argued for an immediate counterattack, demanding that the full Dominion military be recalled from garrison duty across 100 systems to crush the human fleet before it could do further damage to Dominion pride. Others, including several younger councilors who had quietly questioned the war's cost for years, argued that continuing to fight a species capable of hiding an entire fleet for 3 years, undetected by the Dominion's most sophisticated intelligence networks, was a losing proposition no matter how the current confrontation ended. Councillor Drav, despite her initial disbelief, found herself increasingly persuaded by the second argument as she watched Second Dawn's fleet hold its position above the capital without firing a single shot, even as panic spread through the city below. "If they wanted us destroyed," she said quietly to the officers near her, "we would already be dead. Every ship in that fleet has had a clear shot at this stage for the past 10 minutes. This realization spread quickly among the assembled council members. The human fleet's restraint, its refusal to escalate the confrontation into violence despite having a clear opportunity to do so, became its own kind of argument, more persuasive than any weapon could have been. Grand Admiral Vex, watching the political chaos unfold around him, made a decision that would define the rest of his career. "Fleet Admiral Voss," he said, addressing Alina directly through the still-open channel, "what exactly are your terms?" Alina had prepared for this question for 3 years, ever since the earliest planning sessions for Second Dawn had begun. "We are not here to demand your surrender, Grand Admiral. We are here to demand recognition. Humanity will no longer be treated as a conquered people or a problem to be managed. We require a formal, binding peace treaty, recognized by your full council, guaranteeing humanity's sovereignty over our territory, an end to any further dominion military action against human worlds, and recognition of humanity as an equal, independent power in this galaxy, not a subject species. And if the Council refuses these terms, Vex asked. Then we withdraw, Alina said simply. We do not destroy your capital. We do not attack your fleet. We simply leave, and the Dominion will spend the rest of its existence knowing that somewhere, hidden in the dark, an entire human fleet exists that you cannot find and cannot predict, ready to appear again whenever we choose. I suspect that uncertainty would prove far more costly to the Dominion's stability than any battle we could fight today. This answer struck a nerve throughout the Watching Council. The idea of an unknown, unseen threat, capable of appearing without warning at any moment, undermined the very foundation of the confidence the Dominion had built its recent celebrations upon. A war that could be fought, and eventually won through overwhelming force, was one thing. A war against an enemy who could vanish into the dark and reappear years later, wherever and whenever they chose, was something the Dominion had no proven strategy to counter. Councillor Drav stepped forward, taking control of the conversation from the shaken security officers around her. Fleet Admiral Voss, she said, addressing the screen directly, the Dominion Council will need time to properly consider these terms. This is not a decision that can be made in a single afternoon. You have 3 days, Alina replied. My fleet will remain in orbit holding position, taking no aggressive action as a demonstration of good faith. But I will not allow this moment to fade back into uncertainty. The galaxy has spent 11 years believing a story about humanity that was never entirely true. It is time for a new, more accurate story to take its place, and I intend for that story to be settled within 3 days. The channel closed, leaving the Dominion Council to face a decision none of them had ever prepared for. The war they had celebrated as one just days earlier now stood at a genuine crossroads, one that would determine not just the fate of humanity, but the credibility and stability of the entire Scan Dominion in the eyes of every species watching across the galaxy. Grand Admiral Vex remained standing on the stage long after the broadcast ended, staring up at the silent, waiting human fleet above him. 11 years of war had taught him many things about the enemy he had fought, but nothing had prepared him for the particular kind of respect now settling into his chest, respect for a species that had endured a decade of visible defeat in order to secure, in the end, a victory built not on destruction, but on truth. 3 days, he murmured to himself, watching the fleet hold its steady, patient position in the sky above Scarome. Let's see what kind of empire we really are. The 3 days that followed became known, in later human history books, as the Long Wait. On the bridge of the Resolute, Alina Voss did not sleep much. She kept the fleet in constant readiness, watching for any sign that the Dominion Council might choose confrontation over negotiation. Every few hours, updated intelligence came in from Captain Nair's team, still quietly embedded within Scarome's communication networks, reporting on the fierce debates taking place behind closed doors within the council chamber. The debates were as fierce as anyone had expected. Recordings later released to the public, once the crisis had passed, showed a council divided almost evenly between those who wanted to honor the terms Alina Voss had presented, and those who still believed the Dominion's pride and military strength demanded a different response. Councillor Kesh Varn, one of the Dominion's most senior military strategists, argued forcefully for war. If we accept these terms, he said during one particularly heated session, we tell every species in this galaxy that the Scan Dominion can be humiliated, tricked, and forced into concessions by a species 1/100th our size. Every rival power watching this moment will see weakness, not wisdom. Councillor Drav, who had shifted significantly in her thinking since the confrontation began, countered him directly. And if we refuse these terms, she said, we go to war against a fleet we could not find for 3 years, built with technology we still do not fully understand, commanded by people willing to sacrifice their own ships and their own lives to maintain a lie for that entire time. Tell me, Kesh, what makes you so certain we would win a war against an enemy capable of that level of patience and sacrifice? The argument raged for 2 full days before Grand Admiral Vex, who had remained largely silent throughout the debates, finally rose to speak. "I have fought this war for 11 years, he said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine experience rather than political posturing. "I have seen human commanders make decisions that cost them ships, worlds, and lives, decisions that never once made sense to me until 3 days ago. I understand now that every single one of those decisions was part of a plan far larger than any single battle. We were not fighting a weaker enemy who happened to be stubborn. We were fighting an enemy who understood, better than we did, exactly how patient warfare actually works." He paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled counselors. "If we choose war now," he continued, "we choose it against an enemy who has already proven they can outthink us, outweight us, and outmaneuver us, even while losing every visible battle for over a decade. I do not believe that is a war we can win. I believe the wisest choice, the choice that actually protects the Dominion's strength and stability, is to accept the terms Fleet Admiral Voss has offered, and to build something better than 11 years of war ever gave us." His words carried significant weight throughout the chamber. As the Dominion's most celebrated and experienced military commander, his willingness to publicly recommend peace rather than continued conflict shifted the balance of the debate in a way that no amount of political argument alone could have achieved. On the evening of the 3rd day, the Dominion Council reached its decision. Councillor Drav, speaking on behalf of the full council, opened a channel to the Resolute to deliver the Dominion's answer directly to Elena Voss. "Fleet Admiral Voss," she said, her voice steady despite the enormity of the moment, "the Scan Dominion Council has voted by a clear majority to accept the terms you have presented. We are prepared to sign a formal peace treaty recognizing humanity's full sovereignty, ending all hostile action against human territory, and establishing Earth as an equal, independent power in the eyes of this Dominion and its allies." Elena allowed herself a long, quiet breath before responding. 3 years of planning, sacrifice, and patient waiting had led to this exact moment. "On behalf of Earth," she said, "and every person who gave everything to make this day possible, I accept your terms, Councillor Drav. Let us build a peace that actually lasts this time, one built on truth and mutual respect, rather than one side's belief in the other's weakness." The formal signing ceremony took place 2 weeks later, held not on Scarome, but on neutral ground at a space station positioned exactly between Dominion and human territory, a location chosen deliberately to symbolize the new relationship both sides had agreed to build. Grand Admiral Vex attended as part of the Dominion delegation, and before the formal signing began, he requested a private moment with Elena Voss. "I owe you an apology," he said, standing across from her in a quiet room aboard the station. "For 11 years, I fought your people believing we were simply the stronger side facing a stubborn but ultimately weaker enemy. I never once considered that we might be facing an enemy who understood war, patience, and sacrifice better than we did." Elena studied him for a moment before responding. "You fought honorably, Grand Admiral, within the terms of a war neither side chose easily. I don't hold that against you. What matters now is what we build from here." "What will humanity do?" Vex asked, "now that you have the strength to demand far more than simple recognition? Many in the council still expect your people to seek some form of revenge, or at least significant reparation, for 11 years of losses." Elena shook her head. "We didn't build Second Dawn to conquer anyone, Grand Admiral. We built it to make sure we would never again be treated as a people who could simply be erased without consequence. Now that the Dominion understands that, we have no interest in becoming the very thing we spent 11 years resisting. We want peace, real peace, Not a peace built on your side's defeat, but a peace built on mutual respect. Vex considered this for a long moment. That is either the wisest strategy I have ever encountered, he said finally, or the most genuinely honorable one. Perhaps, after everything, it is both. The formal treaty was signed later that day, broadcast across every major channel in both Dominion and human territory, watched by billions of people across 100 worlds. It formally ended 11 years of war, recognized humanity's full sovereignty over its territory, and established the framework for what would eventually become an uneasy but genuine alliance between two species who had once seen each other only as enemies. News of the treaty, and the full story behind Second Dawn, spread quickly across the galaxy. Other species, some who had quietly supported the Dominion out of fear rather than loyalty, began reconsidering their own relationships with the Dominion Council. Others, who had watched humanity's decade of visible struggle with quiet sympathy, found new respect for a species that had endured such losses without ever truly giving up, even when the entire galaxy believed they had. Back on Earth, when the news of the peace treaty finally reached the wider public, the reaction was a complex mixture of relief, grief, and a slow, dawning understanding of just how much had been sacrificed in secret to achieve this outcome. Memorial ceremonies were held across every human colony for the crews of the Ares Crown and every other ship that had been lost during the years of visible war, their sacrifices now understood in a new and deeper light. Elena Voss returned to Earth as a hero, though she never fully embraced the title. She spent the years following the war working to rebuild the colonies that had been lost, and to help integrate the returning crews of Second Dawn back into a public life. Many of them had given up years earlier. Marcus Chen, promoted to full general, took charge of overseeing the new peacetime military, one built not for secrecy and sacrifice, but for genuine defense and cooperation with the Dominion and its allies. Grand Admiral Vex, in the years that followed, became one of the strongest voices within the Dominion advocating for continued peace and cooperation with humanity, often citing his own experience during the final days of the war as proof that respect, not conquest, was the only path toward genuine, lasting stability between different peoples. Historians, both human and scan, would spend decades studying the story of Second Dawn, trying to understand exactly how a species so vastly outnumbered had managed to endure 11 years of visible defeat, while secretly building the means to demand a real and lasting peace. Most agreed that the true answer was not simply a matter of technology or clever tactics, but of patience, sacrifice, and an unwavering refusal to accept a story about themselves that was never actually true. The galaxy had believed, for 11 long years, that humanity had lost. In the end, it was not strength alone, nor deception alone, that proved them wrong. It was the quiet, patient truth that had been building in the shadows the entire time, waiting for exactly the right moment to finally be revealed. And when that moment came, it changed everything.